But it is not only the reparations that we ask from the international community, because we ourselves must repair the damage that was foisted on us. The notion that transit visas, begging for them, must be the lot of our people in order to move across this world cannot be something that gives us satisfaction. There is so much trouble in the world. Excellencies, there is so much trouble in the world. Heads of government, there is so much trouble in the world. Heads of state, there is so much trouble in the world. And I say so because there is no simplicity in it. We get it. I come from a small island state that has high ambition, but that is not able to deliver on that high ambition because the global industrial strategy that we have has fault lines in it. Our ability to access electric cars or our ability to access batteries or photovoltaic panels are constrained by those countries that have the dominant presence and can produce for themselves, but the global south remains at the mercy of the global north on these issues. But it isn't only in that. We heard Al Gore just now speak about the difference in the cost of capital to those of us in the global south. And I ask us, how many more people must speak before those of us who have the capacity to instruct our directors? We have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and to build the future that our people want of us and to give them that pride that is theirs. And we must do so in the spirit and with the results of ADWA. Thank you. Not because I'm an apostle of Bob, as you probably have realized by now, but also because he reminds us of the day-to-day reality of our people and of our citizens. And we have come to Los Angeles hopeful that we're not just going to engage in speeches, or we're not just going to engage in platitudes, but we go home to make a difference to people at perhaps the most difficult time this world has seen in 100 years. We have 3 global crises, and any one is sufficient to bring us down. The climate crisis hurts from you here in California in fires, to us in the Caribbean through the heart attack of hurricanes, and the chronic NCDs of water crises and droughts, or floods, depending on where you go. We fight the pandemic. And even as we talk about the pandemic, we need to start to qualify it, because we fight the COVID pandemic without realizing that the slow onset pandemic of antimicrobial resistance is already upon us, being fueled further by how we farm, how we treat each other with the abuse of antibiotics, and how we literally allow those things to flow into our environment and contaminate our water system. And as if that was not enough, we now fight the prices of food and fuel and fertilizer, knowing full well that the only destination thereafter is going to be a debt crisis and an economic crisis if we do not intervene to break the slide. My friends, how much more evidence do we need? You see men sailing on their ego trip, blast off on their spaceship, million miles from reality. No care for you, no care for me. If I could have sung it, you would have joined me. But I don't need you to join me in the words of this song. I need you to join us in the chorus of action that our people need, not want. Our people need immediate intervention. 6-week crops and 12-week crops is what is going to feed our people. We need to be able to shield them from the price of fertilizer that is making their efforts almost impossible. We need equally to recognize, as you heard Prime Minister Brown and Prime Minister Davis say already this morning, that the debt crisis is already among many developing countries. We simply do not have the fiscal space to respond to crises not spawned by ourselves, but spawned by others. And we are facing a double jeopardy. Our countries were those from whom wealth was extracted in order to build the developed world. Our countries were left at independence with no compact, no money to finance basic rights of housing and healthcare and education. And when we fought to do it, now we find ourselves having those efforts crowded out, literally, by our inability to be able to face and find the money because we are using it to recover from climate crises, not of our own making. Where does the double jeopardy come? That it is the very industrial revolution that the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors financed that is now causing us not to be able to respond to the needs of our people in the most basic of ways that humanity requires. My friends, there is so much trouble in the world, and we think we've found a solution, but we want to tell people only about financing after the climate crisis. We need to be able to prepare before the crisis so we can reduce what we have to spend by 7 times. We need to recognize that adaptation has no private sector follower because there's no return on investment in adapting to the climate realities. That is the function of the state. And therefore, the international community is required in the justice of the moment to help us prevent loss of life and property for a crisis we didn't create. We need to reform the international financial institutions architecture. How can we have an international bank for reconstruction and development that does not reconstruct and develop in today's world? Where is the reconstruction from the climate crisis being financed? Where is the reconstruction from the pandemic being financed? The post-pandemic recovery? Where is the platform for middle-income countries that house 75% of the world's poor? But because they're middle income, we don't remember that. Where is the climate finance being targeted to, justifiably and fairly so, when the numbers show that only 15% of climate finance is going to the climate vulnerable countries? I've not come here just to use words. Let us be practical. We have a duty to solve a few problems. And I think that the format of this meeting needs to change if we are to be able to see real progress and not simply to be part of the problem. We need to talk with each other and not talk at each other as we are doing in set piece speeches. We need to engage and see how we can make a difference in a real way. We have migrants coming not because they choose to come, but because it is their last option. They don't choose to leave who they love and where they love willingly. And when they come, we now know that we don't need to treat them poorly because this year has shown that there's a dignified way to treat migrants. We've seen that in Europe. We need to see it in the Americas. And I don't place that burden on the United States of America alone. I place it on all of us, including my own country, because we cannot be part of the solution by simply talking from outside and not literally putting our shoulders to the plow. The International Organization of Migrants needs our support. And we need to make sure that as we reform the Organization of American States, that instead of it seeking to become a political player, it needs to become a player that simply brings opportunity to our people in the Americas, from Alaska to Chile. And how does that come? If we did nothing else in the next decade in the OAS, but to allow our people to become bilingual and trilingual, people under 18 and adults, then we would change the economic possibilities of this hemisphere in ways that we can't even contemplate. We need to ensure that if we fight this climate crisis injustice, then we fight it not just as small island developing states and developing countries calling for fairness for our nations, but we provide that fairness to our people. And how do I mean? We have taken a decision in Barbados that there can be no award of any contracts for renewable energy without taking into account the bounty that must go to our people. And therefore, accordingly, this year I announced that every rooftop that is owned by anyone in Barbados will have the right to have placed on it, as of right, not a choice, not a right to apply, as of right, photovoltaic systems from 2.5 kilowatts to 5 to 10 to 20. Why? Because we don't own individually the wind, the sea, and the sun. It is the patrimony of the nation. And if we are to move our people out of poverty, then we must use the bounty that is afforded to us through renewable energy, good jobs, but also good investment to allow our people to benefit. And we ask you to recognize that we must not only engage in platitudinous comments about what we can achieve with net zero. Net zero does not mean fossil fuel free. It means still that there will be 20% energy coming from fossil fuels. We know natural gas is that clean fuel. But as we do it, let us recognize that it is not possible to exclude those developing countries who have now the opportunity to finance their way to net zero simply because we want to keep the world in the construct of the old imperial order in which it is found. Whether it is a reform of the international financial institutions or whether it is moving ourselves into a new reality, we cannot continue to cement the inequalities of an old imperial order. And that is why I've come also to thank President Biden and Vice President Harris. For too long, there has been benign neglect. And the Partnership for the Americas, as well as the Climate Partnership Pact 2030, offers us a real possibility of hope. But it is up to each of us to keep and hold each other accountable. We are happy that coming out of yesterday, we made progress that we didn't see the day before. And we hope that tomorrow we will build on the subcommittees that will make a real difference on energy security, food security, and finance access that will mean that we can look our people in the face and say we have done right by you. We cannot achieve it overnight, but we are moving in the right direction. And we must also address the reality of exclusion with a heavy heart, but with hope. We come to Paris today not to reinforce the divisions of the past, the orders of the past, but we come to Paris to identify the common humanity that we share and the absolute moral imperative to save our planet and to make it livable. We don't need a lot more words today. And quite honestly, I don't know that I have it in me to give more words. As I speak to you, my country, that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and others in the Caribbean, in the Eastern Caribbean, are under a tropical storm watch for Tropical Storm Beth, literally. Yesterday, I had to decide whether to stay or to go. And I chose to stay because it is important that we move to action. Behind Tropical Storm Beth is another system. And hence, this is our new reality. We have heard this morning from Vanessa. We've heard from the economists. We've heard from the president of Niger. And everyone has spoken truth with feeling, with clarity. And Emmanuel, I've left you for last, because privately I call this the How Dare You Summit. How dare you? How dare you upset the order? How dare you step out of your crease and summon us all to this inflection moment that will determine whether we will have the capacity and the will to bring pace and scope to the problem. I can tell you that there has been movement. Yes, 9 months ago, no one was speaking about natural disaster clauses. Now we have people wanting to recognize the wisdom of it, because countries do need to pause debt payments if they are going to house and feed people who are victims of a climate crisis. Doesn't quite work as well for those who have to move people who are suffering from drought, as the president of Malawi has had to do. So we need to perfect it. 9 months ago, no one was talking about multilateral development bank reform at scale. And Ajay, the World Bank was not as forceful in its commitment to the crisis of climate as it is now. And we wish you all the best, because in your hands lies the need for pace and scope. 9 months ago, we were not prepared to discuss issues of debt. And Kristalina, when no one else was stepping up during the pandemic, yes, you led the way, recognizing that your duty was not only to deal with the symptoms of the balance of payments problems, but to go back to the treaty and its underlying objective of securing growth and macro and financial and economic stability. But what is required of us is not simply to mark a card for progress. As we heard from Vanessa, what is required of us now is absolute transformation and not reform of our institutions. And that transformation is required because while the world knew since the 1890s that we were facing the warming of the climate, we chose not to heed the advice of scientists. And that which could have been done in more than a century is now being reduced to be done in less than a decade. And Secretary General, my heart bleeds for you, because yours has been almost that constant voice in the wilderness. But I say to you that it has not been in vain. As you heard from President Macron this morning, there is now the beginning of the understanding that poverty and climate cannot be separated, that education and climate cannot be separated. And later today we will go into the details of what that action must look like, much of which we have put in the Bridgetown Initiative, not because we believe we have the answers alone, but simply because we had the will to pull people together and say, let us discuss these issues and let us make enough noise consistently to command the attention of those who must speak and who must act. I ask us today not to leave Paris without understanding that the bolstering of the political ambition that is required must secure transformation and not reform. And I ask us to ensure that those of us who are heads of government and heads of state recognize to go east and to go west, we are first forced to go north. It is not right. And it is not beyond the heads of government and heads of state, of the region, of the Caribbean community, and of the continent of Africa to determine that we must stop talking about, but simply do what is necessary to build the air bridges and sea bridges to guarantee that we control our destiny. I ask us to reflect on this because it is this simple act, apart from our music and our culture and our food, that will guarantee that it is not simply heads of government and heads of state that will meet in Accra or Bridgetown, but it is ordinary people who will be able to trade and to move from the closest point of Dakar to the closest point of Bridgetown, to be able to open up the opportunities that technically ought to be available not just simply through the Africa Free Trade Area or the CARICOM single market and economy, but through the combined opportunities provided by both. I ask us equally to recognize that in an era where AI is threatening to redefine what humanity can do and even if we can survive, that it is not ours to be the victims once again of technology as we were with gunpowder, but it is for us to help shape the future of the world, because more often than not it is Africa and its people who have brought the humanizing forces to bear on civilization. And if we are to be the cradle of civilization, then we are to be the protectors of people and planet, of humanity, as we go forward. And some watching on may say, how? And I say, how not? How not does a continent that has 40% of the world's minerals not be in charge of helping to secure the destiny and stability of the planet? How not does the numbers of our two communities, who constitute a third of the world's states, not act in singular purpose to forge the kind of world that we want and to be able to ensure that the institutions that deny access to us, to hear our voices as reflective of the continent and of the small island developing states of the world, how do we not secure that admission, which is not only just, but a moral imperative if the world is to have stability in this 21st century? My friends, I ask you, how do we not secure this victory when 1 in every 5 and possibly 1 in every 4 persons on the planet will come from this continent and its diaspora? Those who lead today have a moral imperative, not just to our citizens in our own countries, but above all else, to unity. The spirit of Adwa demands of us that we recognize that even in the face of the greatest technology being foisted upon us, that we can rise and win if we act in unity. This has been a message not given by our generation alone, but by previous generations of African and Caribbean leaders. But we ask ourselves, why does it elude us? And the answer comes not from outside, but only from within. When I speak of the USA with affection, I do not only want to speak of that which is known in the Americas. I want to speak about that which ought to have been possible if the 1884 Berlin talks did not take place. The possibility of the United States of Africa, which is as diverse as India, which is as diverse as China in terms of ethnicity and language and religion, but which is entirely possible if we see not ourselves first, but we see the unity of ourselves together. This may be the cry of a naive and romantic daughter of Africa. But if that is the case, I prefer to die being a naive and romantic daughter of Africa than one who is cynical and one who is daunted by the actions and power of others. We know what it is to stand in unity with you to fight apartheid and to fight for the liberation of the peoples of Africa. For when President Castro stood to send people from his own country to Southern Africa to free your people, it was in my own country that the planes refueled, ensuring that that battle was possible. And when 100 years ago almost, A Barbadian man and woman left our nation and left the United States to come here, Arnold and Mignon Ford. He wrote the anthem and lyrics of the anthem of the United Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, and his wife dared to establish a co-educational school here in Ethiopia, ensuring that boys and girls could receive education in a time and at a time when war was dominating the global landscape. They chose to see light rather than darkness. I ask us today, in tangible terms, that will allow our people to travel, that will allow us to pool our investments to ensure that the people of Africa not be denied the electricity that is so necessary as a platform for participation in the new world. I ask us not only to pool that investment, but to also ensure that we pool our voices, because there is too much division in this world today. There is too much war and there is too much conflict. And we know what precipitates and causes that. If we leave Addis Ababa with the commitment that the world is not going to be safe without a prosperous and stable Africa, then we understand what is the moral imperatives we must undertake in each of our countries to secure that unity of purpose and to secure ultimately the saving of the people and planet. I ask you today to recognize that, and I thank Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed for agreeing that the first in-face summit of CARICOM and the African Union should take place here in Addis Ababa on the 7th of September of this year of our Lord. By that simple act, we build on the inaugural summit which took place virtually in 2021. But more importantly, we seek to regularize and to establish as a permanent point of interaction the unity of which I speak and call for. And I ask you as I leave this podium to recognize that we too in the Caribbean want to see you. Indeed, in my own country in Barbados, we will celebrate the Caribbean Festival of Arts, the 15th CariFesta, from August 22nd to August 31st. And we do so not only asking for those from Cuba and Bahamas in the north, to Venezuela, to Suriname and Guyana in the south, to Belize in the west and the Eastern Caribbean to come together to express our commitment to each other creatively through food and fashion and music and dance and art and sculpture, and talk of philosophy, talk of religion, talk of who we are, talk of the future. I ask us to recognize that we celebrate this year our resilience, and that we do so not only asking the people of the Caribbean to come, but the people from whom we came here in Africa, in India, in China, and the continent to which we went, in particular in Central America and Latin America. This is our moment to show the world that we were not simply apostrophes to the history and the modern history of humanity, but that truly we are the ones who can level the playing field and to create the opportunities that will allow the world to see people, hear people, and feel people, and to value the planet and its biodiversity at the very time when it is greatest in crisis. Let us remove the scars of history and be firm craftsmen of our fate, recognizing that the only people who can stop us now are we but ourselves.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Now, I've been talking about Mia Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and how bold she is, and how open and truthful she has been all this time. Now, we lack some leaders who can talk on our behalf, that the Caribbean have scarcity of good leaders. Africa has scarcity of good leaders. I talk this not because I think there are so many good leaders or there are some leaders who are good or bad, but the whole Caribbean and the whole African is full of puppets and rotten leaders. you are going to agree with me at some point that we are in this mess in Africa, that our own black brothers and sisters in the diaspora face the oppression because of bad leadership that happened some few years ago, that bad leadership that still exists in Africa and in the Caribbean, that no one has ever come out as a leader to say this thing that is happening to our own brothers in the diaspora is bad, that the systematic racism that has always been there must be stopped. They have never come out to condemn whatever is happening. Now, no one is actually talking about how oppressed our brothers and sisters have always been, those that were sold into slavery. Now, I've been always saying the same thing, and I still say it. For us to make Africa great, for us to make the black race great, for us to make humanity great, one, we need unity. Two, we need to discourage puppet behaviors, that we do not tolerate any puppet behaviors. I'm moved by this speech by Mia Motley, and I always say this. I hope she actually means and she actually does whatever she preach. I should not at one point find that she's preaching wine while drinking water, or she's preaching water while drinking wine. Now, I want us to talk about whatever is happening in the Caribbean and in Africa. Now, when we say we must make our own people great, when we say we want to liberate our motherland, and when we say we want to liberate black people from oppression, from slavery, if you ever think that slavery ended, then you are living in a very wild dream. If you think oppression has ever ended, then you still do not exist as a full and normal human being, because these are things that happen in our own eyes. These are things that have been happening, and the oppressors have never feared to do them. It's because, one, the black people are divided and are not at all united. If at all black people were united and they were speaking one language, the language of unity, to be sure and to be honest with you, we could not be having these problems that we have today. We could not still be crying out for help. I've seen presidents begging Donald Trump to actually reinstate the USAID. I've been seeing people crying in the Caribbean. I've seen people from Haiti crying that this one has been stopped. Are we going to die? I've seen people crying in Jamaica in the media that the USAID is gone. How are we going to live? How are we going to get social health care and all that stuff? And my question has always been, where do the taxes go to? Where do the taxes that the people pay to actually receive these services go to? These are questions we must ask ourselves. And if at all we want to be great, if the Caribbean want to be great the way Mia Motley wants the Caribbean to be great and Africa to be great, we must do things different. We can't do things the same way and expect different results. This is whatever we should do. Change or perish. We only have two options, that we either change or we perish. If we don't change, then we are going to perish. So, brothers and sisters, we ought and we have the mandate, and we actually, as the black people, have the responsibility to change our fate. We have the responsibility to change the story we've been having. We have the responsibility to change things around and how they have been happening. If we continue crying out, we are going to cry out until we are dead. Our children will come inherit the same problems. They still cry out, they are dead. So the only way, they say, there is that someone who must change the story for the story to have a different storyline. For you to have a different results, you must do things differently. we've been facing oppression. Our brothers have been facing racial segregation or systematic racism, however you want to call it. They have been facing economic segregation. They have been facing economic disparities. Who has been there to talk for them? They have been fighting their wars alone. African continent didn't help them. The few leaders who were talking on behalf of our black brothers and whatever they have been going through, they were eliminated. No one talked in Africa. When Muammar Gaddafi rose to say that Africa should unite and call back its children who are enslaved in the Western countries, he was eliminated. No other no African leader actually stood and said, Obama, you did bad. This was not the way. Obama, an African guy who was badly used in some way, because if actually we wanted unity, then Muammar Gaddafi was bringing unity. And I do not see at any point why the US government profiled him and actually brought chaos to Libya. And today, you go to Libya, people are crying out that the system that came in after Muammar Gaddafi was killed is actually corrupt, very, very corrupt. That the Western countries are now mining and extracting mineral resources in Libya. The people of Libya who are actually benefiting from their own resources, those that had free education, free health, the whole country were having free health, free education. People were getting jobs. People were being paid at the end of the month, the jobless people, because of the mineral resources being extracted from their country. They are no longer benefiting from the same things. The Libyan currency was one of the strongest currency. It was actually the strongest in Africa. And it had more power. It was more strong than even the dollar. Where is it today? So when Africa is rising, we've always had someone who brought this continent down. And for this case, we say we are going to support revolutionary leaders. We are going to support Pan-Africanists. We are going to support people like Mia Motley until or unless they change. But we are going to share their content here. We are going to share their messages, and we are going to support them in whatever way. Because if we don't do this, we are still going to be in the same mess. If we don't change the way Africa is thinking and the way Africa has always been, and the way our black brothers have always been, we are going to have the same problems. So this is the time, black brothers and sisters, we should get ourselves united. We should get ourselves into one place, talk the language of unity. If we are not going to do this, if we are going to still live in the same division, expect no different results. Expect the same results of oppression, systematic racism, economic disparities, social disparities, and every other bad thing that might come our way. So we have a chance to change, and this is the story, and we want to change the story. The story has always been about oppression. The story has always been about crying for our own human rights being violated. We are going to change the story. We are no longer going to cry out. We are going to stand and fight for our own freedom and fight for our own liberation. The liberation of black people is here. Sooner or later, we are going to have it. Thank you so much for having taken the time to watch this video. I appreciate so much. If it's your first time on this channel, this is Eli from Africa. Consider subscribing, sharing, liking, and commenting on this video. I love you all.